Welcome to the Unstuck and Happy podcast. We all get stuck, but how long you stay there is up to you. I'm your host, John Polish, founder of the Unstuck Happiness Conference. And this is the show where we interview people who've overcome tremendous adversity and have emerged as leaders. So if you need a little inspiration and hope in your day, get ready, because here comes another great Unstuck story. Well, welcome to another episode of Unstuck and Happy. I'm really excited about today. I have with me today a good friend, and she happens to be one of the nicest people I've ever met. However, that could just all be a lie, because she also happens to be the number one expert on imposter syndrome. So that whole nice thing could just be fake. I don't know. Anyway, welcome to the show, Maureen Zappala.
Wow, thanks, John. Gosh, I hope it's not fake. I think it is. But I think I might fake other things, but I might not. I might not fake some. Well, I'm not a fake.
Not an imposter when it comes to that, right?
I hope not.
So, how did you get involved in imposter syndrome? Where did that come from in your life?
About 7 years ago, I've been a speaker for probably 10 years and used to speak on the topic of just generic leadership topics. And honestly, it was pretty common. It was commonplace. It was boring even to me. And so I was like, this really isn't grabbing my soul. I'm not really enjoying speaking about this. And I stumbled on a book about imposter syndrome, and it totally rattled me. For those that don't know what imposter syndrome is, it's a secret self-doubt that hits smart people, that makes them doubt that they are smart, that makes them think, I got my success totally by random accident, and therefore I don't deserve it. So they feel like fakes, they feel like imposters. I resonated with that because my background is engineering, used to work for NASA, and every day I walked into work thinking, they made a mistake in hiring me. Didn't they look at my transcript? I'm not the superstar person. And I I was unable to believe that there were other qualities that got me the job. So I felt like an imposter a lot. It was years later after I left NASA that I stumbled on this book, and it gave me a new mission. I left the bulk of the leadership topics behind and started researching, digging in, interviewing, just getting immersed in this irrational self-doubt that strikes smart people.
So you were literally a rocket scientist, but didn't feel like you were smart enough for it?
That's it. Yeah, my degree is in mechanical engineering, and I worked in jet propulsion at NASA, but jet propulsion, rocket propulsion are the same, similar. Right. And so yeah, I'm a rocket scientist, and yeah, I did not feel like I deserved that title.
But now that you're away from it, you can wear it proudly, right?
Oh yeah, and even when I look back, I mean, I did great work. My work was published, it was respected. I was in a management position. People came to me. In the moment, I did not give the weight and credibility to those facts that in hindsight now I do. I wish I knew then what I know now.
Right. So imposter syndrome is kind of a buzzword these days. We hear it a lot, but I think that we all suffer from it. Some of us more so than others. What is your experience like? Is this something that everyone resonates with?
The data says 70% of the population struggles with it. I'm guessing from my experience, it's much higher. It's not 100%. I mean, everybody struggles with some aspect of self-doubt. That's normal and even healthy, because a measured amount of self-doubt can help you to check yourself before you do something really irrational or stupid. But my experience is that a lot of people don't know what it is, and then when I explain the symptoms and how it manifests itself, that's when you see light bulbs go off, like, oh my gosh, it has a name and a solution. Yes, I'm on board. So I think you're right. A lot of people do struggle with it. A lot of people don't even know that they struggle with it.
So what is the difference between self-doubt and imposter syndrome?
Well, everybody has a measure of self-doubt, and that's partly because we are individual, isolated beings. I mean, just because we have our own body, we have our own mind, we have our own experiences. And unless you connect the dots to other people, you can't really value and treasure your own experiences. So when you do get around other people, that's when that compare and despair starts to hit. So that self-doubt really comes out of comparing yourself around other people. Now, the difference between self-doubt and imposter syndrome is imposter syndrome is like self-doubt on steroids. It is not just, oh, wow, that person has more experience than me. The imposter syndrome goes a step further and says, not only does that person have more experience than me, my experience was totally illegitimate, and therefore everything I have done till now has been a colossal fraud that I've perpetuated and perpetrated among people. And I've somehow pulled the wool over their eyes. And at any minute, they're going to figure it out. And all of my success will be poof, gone. So it's not just that, oh, I'm feeling a little insecure. It's like, this rules my life. This defines me.
So would you say, it sounds to me like the phrase that you would hear most often would be the "who am I?"
The who am I? Who do I think I am? I don't measure up. I'm not good enough. When will they figure it out that I don't know what they think I know? Yeah, there's a whole litany of internal conversations that go on.
So do you often get imposter syndrome, wondering why you're talking about imposter syndrome?
Well,
Like a thing?
here's where my imposter syndrome, because the dirty little secret about imposter syndrome, and it's good and bad. There's good things and bad things. The dirty little secret is that it really never does completely go away. You can't eliminate it, but you can alleviate it. So the strategies that I teach when I speak and when I train and when I coach, it's about alleviating the symptoms. Now, my struggle with specifically about imposter syndrome is I don't have a PhD in psychology. So it's so easy then for me to say, if I'm not that educated, who am I to talk about this? So I have to use my own techniques on myself and say, but the way you present it is useful. The research you've done is valuable. Your experience that you bring to me, I'm speaking to myself, my experience that I bring to the table is worth something. So I have to kind of talk myself off my own ledge to alleviate the symptoms.
Well, I can relate to that on so many levels. Most of my presentations are around overcoming tragedy, overcoming trauma, about emotional intelligence, about unstuck and happy. And so there are days when I go to start the Unstuck and Happy podcast, and I'm not either one of those things, not unstuck or happy at certain times. And so you start to wonder, who am I? And with me presenting emotional intelligence, not only do I not have a PhD, but I was once married to a psychiatrist who told me flat out I didn't have any right to talk about it. But when I see the results that I get from it, it reminds me, okay, this is valid. I can do this. But you have to keep going back to the results, because every once in a while that creeps back in. Like, why am I doing this?
You're absolutely right. It is an intentional, intellectual process that you must go through. You really do have, in fact, it's one of the strategies that I teach, is that you really have to look, capture a thought that you have, like, who am I? Evaluate it, put it on the witness stand, drill down to, is that true? Is it false? Where did it come from? Just because we have a thought doesn't make it true, and oftentimes doesn't make it ours. Sometimes it came from somewhere else. So you really have to be intentional to evaluate your own thoughts. We're so sometimes undisciplined with the thoughts that we allow to take resident in our head. And that, teaching emotional intelligence, that.
And one of the things that I found that's even worse is that those things that we question are true. But there's a whole nother truth as well. And so I know I shared this at an event we were at a couple months ago, where I went through a period in my life where there's a whole lot of questions about who am I and why am I doing this? And how could I possibly be doing this when I have all these things going on over here, that kind of discredit me from being able to do that. And all of those things were true. But then
Mhm.
I sat down one day and had to do my bio for a presentation. And as I'm doing my bio, I'm writing about all these other things that I have accomplished and I have done. And all of those things are true as well. So it's kind
Mhm.
of like the angel and devil on your shoulder. Like
Yeah.
the devil over here on your shoulder is telling you, who are you to do that? You can't do this. You're not this successful. You don't have the things that the credentials you need. And then over here is like, well, yes, you do. You've accomplished, you have this. And what I found is the old adage, the one that grows is the one you feed.
Mhm. Mhm.
So literally half a new pick a side.
Mhm. And I think too, I mean, you make a great point about, one of the exercises that I do is that I have people list the accomplishments they have in their life and then share it with a partner. And sometimes that's so hard for them because we've almost been trained to have an overabundance of humility, to where when we talk about our successes, it sounds like bragging, and that is looked down on. Well, acknowledging the things that you've accomplished is not bragging, it's simply listing facts. So we need to separate the bragging part from the I'm just listing facts. So you make a great point. It's a struggle.
And that's definitely difficult to do. One of the things that I found, I've done years of coaching and therapy and stuff too. And a lot of my business and everything else is about overcoming adversity, overcoming obstacles. And at one point, I had a coach ask me, they're like, you have constantly overcome, you've built a business about celebrating the struggle. And what I found was that because I'm so into kind of celebrating the struggle, that I almost thought that there was certain merit in struggling.
Mm.
That the struggle, that I would lean towards the struggle because it was
Mm.
more honorable than to say, no, I'm this good and I have accomplished. Like to say,
Wow.
no, I had to overcome that. That somehow I resonate more with the struggle than with the success.
Wow, that's pretty powerful.
Yeah.
It almost speaks to I remember a friend of mine, and she was young. She was probably 21 at the time. She made a comment that I thought, holy cow, that's a pretty powerful truth. She had gone through a lot of difficulty in life, a lot of family struggles, tragedy, even at her young age. And she said, I think I'm just one of those people that's destined to suffer. And I thought, wow, we all suffer. There's no doubt about it. But it made me sad to think that that was her conclusion.
Yeah.
And I wanted to say there's value in suffering, yes, but don't live there. That's not a healthy place to be.
And it's really, it sounds like it would be hard having suffered so much that you either just want to give up or stay there. But
Mhm.
it's just as hard having overcome it so often to not just accept that you're just going to have to continually face it.
Mhm.
Yeah,
Mhm.
it's been an interesting challenge for sure.
Mhm. Mhm.
So tell a little bit more about how does imposter syndrome, how could that get somebody emotionally stuck?
Because I think it's because we confuse an intellectual choice with an emotional choice. What feels right. I mean, we how many times have you heard people say, just go with your gut? This feels like the right choice, or I'm going to do what makes me feel happy. Well, those are all feelings. Those are all emotional driven decisions and circumstances, which, gosh, I'm 59 years old. I've learned over life, emotions are not trustworthy. They're fickle, they're deceptive, and they are, they can be all consuming. So what tends to keep people unstuck is that you get stuck in that emotional, like, oh, boo-hoo, or I feel sorry for myself, or I, I feel I don't measure up. And people will use those words. They'll use feeling words instead of I don't think I am, or I think I won't, or I think I can't.
Mm-hmm.
So we need to make that shift from the emotion to the intellect, because you're and any psychologist, any expert in neurolinguistic programming, I'm sure you've learned it you teach it even in emotional intelligence. Your emotions, your thoughts and your emotions drive your behavior, your choices, and your results. So it's a link in a chain. You gotta tweak those links.
I'm actually in the process of recording my online courses right now, and I'm doing 3 of them. And there are 3 that will be done in a series. And the reason I'm doing them in a series is because they have to be done in order. The
Mm-hmm.
first one is about understanding where your emotions come from. The second one is living unstuck, which is all about processing the emotions. The third one is finding your happiness. So how do you recreate a new normal? And I share that because one of my taglines that I use all the time is that cognitive solutions do not fix emotional problems.
I love that. I've heard you say that before. That line is brilliant.
Thanks. And where it came about was I started with the finding your happiness, with the recreating your life. And I wrote a book about it, and I did the outline, here's exactly what to do. And I started doing workshops on it. And I noticed that people were loving the workshops, but they kept coming back every single month to the next workshop, still talking about the same problems. And then I realized even myself, I still was dealing with a lot of the same issues. And I thought, like, we're giving the solutions here. Why is there not any life change taking place?
Hmm.
And what I realized was that there are actually emotional attachments we have to our past, which hold us back. Even if we know exactly what to do, when we try to do it, we get stuck.
Mm-hmm.
And perfect example is, you and I have both been very involved in the speaking business. And, I can look at how to run a speaking business. I could probably teach a course on it in my sleep. And yet there are still parts of it that I struggle with a lot and it's not because I don't know what to do. There are emotional attachments I have from way back in my past, certain things that I was brought to believe that where the imposter syndrome starts to kick in.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I
Mm-hmm.
can't do that. Or almost like, for one thing, selling. When it comes to selling, I have a difficult time with it, but I realize it's stuff that I learned in childhood, like don't trust people that are trying to sell you something.
Mm-hmm.
And so there really is something to dealing with those emotions. And the way I look at it is like, remember years ago, they used to say how information was power, knowledge was power, information's key and all that. I don't think that's true anymore because we live in an era where we all have the same information available to us like 24/7.
Mm-hmm.
Like most of us can figure anything out with our cell phones in like 5 minutes. So the key really in the future is going to be emotional intelligence. How
Mm-hmm.
can you process and keep moving so that you don't get stuck?
Yeah, I think that's so true because in my podcast, I interviewed an expert in childhood trauma, and she looks at childhood trauma and how it manifests itself specifically in high performing people, which imposter syndrome strikes high performers. It strikes people in certain industries, the STEM industry, the performing arts industry, CEO level type people, entrepreneurs, um, people that have accomplished a level of success. So that's her target market. And the things that she said in this podcast interview were so amazing. And she said a lot of the same things that you're talking about you can't use a cognitive decision or a cognitive solution to fix the emotional problem. Now, you can use your cognitive powers to identify the emotional problem, but that's not going to fix it. You're right. You have to go back and fix that emotional detachment, wound, connection. And I know that. I mean, I lived it. I lost my parents when I was a teenager. Both parents I lost when I was a teenager. I had health concerns in my late teens, and who knows how many broken hearts I've had, or how many times I've had my heart broken. I went through an ugly divorce, so I've got a truckload of trauma and issues that emotionally have scarred me, but I use my intellect to identify what am I going to work on, how am I going to work on it, how am I going to get fixed so that I can move past where I am stuck sometimes.
And a lot of times those emotional traumas, the big things, we process those fairly easily at times because we just kind of step up. And I think resilience is easy when you're in the face of it. It's the little things that come up out of nowhere that you don't expect,
Mm.
that you start questioning, that really can hold you back a lot of times.
Mm-hmm. And it's interesting, you say, you use the phrase little things. But when we're on this side of hesitation, that little thing feels like a big thing. And then when you push through it, that little thing becomes even littler. And you're like, why didn't I do that before? You know what I mean?
Yeah. So I did the last episode. Yeah, last episode we talked about anxiety
Mm-hmm.
and how a simple task will cause somebody to freeze. And, again, you should be able to do it. But for some reason, we get mental blocks that really lock us up at times.
Yeah. And I think too, there's an element of how physically our brains are wired. I mean, some of it is emotional, some of it is from, junk that we're dragging through our lives, but we really are limited to the physiology, the chemistry in our brain. My daughter has ADD and she needs to be medicated. When she's not on her medication, I can't just say to her, focus better, because the harder she tries, the harder it is. So there's a chemical imbalance. So I used to be one of those, don't drug your kids. Don't, medication is voodoo. No, I'm not like that anymore. Whatever we can do to kind of help the process, I'm all on board for it.
Right. So let me ask you this. This might be a little bit off topic, but I think one of the things I teach is that every problem is really the result of an unmet expectation. You expect things to be a certain way, and when it's not, it creates a gap, and we fill that gap with a negative emotion. Now, one of the things that we've talked about in the past on here is depression. Mm-hmm. And what I have witnessed with depression quite often is that, if you're unhappy because of that gap, there's really only two things you can do. You can do something different to get what you want, or you can change what you want. And what I've seen a lot of times with people who suffer from depression is they will actually lower their expectation so that there's not as much disappointment. So it narrows that gap. So they lack the highs and lows because they've really dropped the bottom line on what it is that they truly want. And I think a lot of that comes from not believing that they could possibly get what they wanted no matter what they did. Mm-hmm. How does that play in with this? It's obviously a self-doubt issue. I don't know if it's an imposter syndrome issue or not, but it's that looking at a situation and saying, you know what, I'll never be successful. I'll never have that anyway. And so they literally quit trying.
People with imposter syndrome rarely quit trying. They turn up the volume of their trying, and they get themselves on this perpetual wheel of, I've got to do better. I've got to do better. I've got to do well. Everybody expects me to do well. I can't let them down. So the expectation really isn't, they don't have an expectation on themselves. They feel pressured by everybody else's expectation on them. So the idea of letting other people down is paralyzingly terrifying, and they will not let that happen. So they get on that hamster wheel and they just keep going and going and going. Now, what's interesting, and I teach this in my workshops, a person with imposter syndrome will, for example, if they are faced with a new challenge, like maybe it's a new project or a new job or a new set of circumstances, and I'm thinking, professionally here, they'll respond in one of two ways. They'll either over prepare because they think I can't screw up, so I'm going to dot every I, cross every T, eliminate any possibility of failure, anticipate anything that could go wrong, and have a contingency plan for that. I mean, just over prepare. And they end up doing fine. They do great. The other way they might respond is to procrastinate. It's almost the exact opposite. They think, I don't know exactly what to do, so right now I won't do anything. I'll just delay and delay and delay until it's too late to delay, and then they jump into action, and they look a lot like that over-preparer. So either way, they're driven by this internal panic of they expect something of me. And if I work hard enough, and if I do enough, if I'm charming enough, if I am professional enough, if I say the right things, dress the right way, appear the right way, they really won't notice that inside here is somebody who is terrified of failing. So when you talk about the expectation and that gap is so small because they've done so much work to close the gap. Does that make sense?
It does in a way. But have they really closed it, or they wouldn't be feeling the imposter syndrome? There's something still there.
what happens is that, and imposter syndrome was actually kind of identified back in the 70s by two clinical psychologists who saw a pattern in their clients, especially these they were, I don't know why, but they were exclusively working with high-powered women. I think they were doing a research project. But anyway, all these women came in and they saw a pattern of these women, and these women came to them with just the same type of things that anybody would go to counseling for. Struggling with relationships. They were depressed. They were anxious. They were, just dissatisfied at a core level. And what they saw with consistency is that every single one of these women in a high level position felt like they didn't deserve their success. So, but it was a long-term process, a long-time process. These women didn't start out feeling depressed. It grew over time. So that gap was small. And as they kept working and working and working, realizing they couldn't even enjoy their own success, that's where the gap grew bigger. That's where they started to feel the depression. That's what drove them to go find, a therapist. So I teach people way back here before they get on that hamster wheel, because I don't want them to get to that point where they're landing in a therapist's office.
Well, and as you experienced a few weeks ago when I did the graph in another group that we were at, is that, and I did the personal happiness graph with Maureen a few weeks ago, is that what could very well happen is they're so focused on that responsibility, sense of purpose issue that it begins to impact other areas of their lives, which is when depression and things like that set in. But you said something that was really interesting in that it's almost like the person who's suffering from depression is suffering from self-doubt in almost the same exact way that the imposter is. It's just that the level of action that they've taken from that original feeling of self-doubt. So I guess I share that just for the people who are feeling depressed out there, that just because somebody else looks like they have it all together doesn't mean that they don't struggle with the same level of self-doubt that you do. It's just the actions they've taken to try to overcome it look very differently than the person who's depressed.
That is absolutely the truth. We all have our ways of compensating and trying to appear together.
Right.
And some of us do it better than others.
And so when we think of imposter syndrome, we almost automatically think of work. How does this manifest in our personal lives?
Oh my gosh, I have a great example. It surprisingly strikes parents, totally unrelated to their professional life, and I'll even further isolate it down to new mothers. I'm a rocket scientist, but there was nothing like having kids to make me feel completely stupid. And when I went out to, and my kids are a year and a half apart, and they're adults now, but when they were just, baby and a toddler, and I'd go out to like mom's events just so that I could have conversation with, somebody who wasn't calling me mommy. And I would look around at these other moms that just seemed to have it all together. Like they were showered and cleaned up and smelled good, and their kids were like all in a row with pretty bows and, cleaned up and polite. And I thought, I am so failing as a parent. I felt like a fraud. I felt like, why did God give me these kids? It's only by his mercy and goodness that these kids are still alive, because I can't figure out how I've kept them alive. I'm one of those people that the motherhood volume has always been very low in my head. Now, when you ask my kids now as adults, how did I, rate me on a scale of 1 to 10, how did I do? They rank me pretty high, but I didn't feel that in the moment.
Right. I don't know why, but the old Einstein quote just jumped in my head that, if you ask a fish to climb a tree, they'll feel like they're stupid the rest of their life. That one.
Yeah.
So we all have different things that we need to learn. That's for sure. But how else, other than that, how else does it show up in person? Because I would have assumed that it would follow you into your personal life in a lot of ways.
Well, it does. Identify myself professionally as a speaker. Relationally, I'm a mom. I'm divorced. So then I also think, oh my gosh, I everybody thought I had a great marriage, and guess what? I didn't. So I thought, did I fake it? Well, I don't know that I faked it. There were just things in my marriage that I just didn't show. It wasn't like I was faking anything. I think when we look at our personal lives, it is so easy to do that compare and despair. Like, their house is bigger. They've got, their kids are in private school. They live in that neighborhood. They, it's that green-eyed monster of envy that comes out. So it makes us feel substandard, that we don't measure up, that we have nothing to offer. And here's too another thing. All of our experiences in our lives, our memories, our family of origin, the places we've lived, the jobs we've had, the hurts, the successes, everything it feeds into who we are. And that's a gift and a treasure that we offer to other people, but we don't believe it. And partly it's because we're so close to it, we undervalue it. We don't really, like people find out that I'm a former rocket scientist, they are like marveled. And I'm like, I don't know, it's just what I did. I have to take a step back and say, it actually was pretty flippin' cool to do that. So, don't rob other people of the wonder of what you are offering them, because it is wonderful.
And it is challenging to accept that without being too humble and too, almost putting yourself down because you don't want to own that experience.
Well, and people can feel that fake humility.
Mm-hmm.
People can feel when it almost seems like you're trying to extract from them praise and compliments and adulation.
Yeah. One of the dangers of like learning all of this and knowing this, like years ago, I used to look at that person who is perfectly put together and, look and think, man, they're just a beautiful person. And the danger now is I look at them and say, boy, they look beautiful. I wonder what they're covering up on the inside. It's almost like, they're working hard for something.
I look at it, I think that too. And then I take it a step further and I think, what wound are they trying to hide?
Right.
That gives me more compassion for them instead of judgment. You know what I mean? Instead of like, what secret are they hiding? It's more of like, wow, I wonder what happened in their life that made them. And I learned that from my mom. My mom she was kind of a cold person. And it wasn't until, she passed away when I was 17. It wasn't until later in her life, not long before she died, that I realized that she had been so badly wounded as a younger person. And it was like, that was a revelation to me. Like, people are crusty and crunchy because they've been hurt. And how can I have compassion for that?
And that's one of the main reasons why we do this and doing the podcast and the conferences, and that is to show that everybody has a story.
Yeah.
And when you see that people who are similar to you, who are able to overcome and, able to live a normal life after what they've been through, that hopefully it'll give you the faith and hope that you need to keep moving too. And so, that's really our hope with this podcast and everything else that we're doing here.
Well, you use the word faith, and that's actually a huge component about overcoming imposter syndrome. The core of the imposter syndrome experience is the core experience that permeates an entire human population, and that's the experience of shame. At our core, we feel shameful, and we are ashamed. And shame isn't about what you did. Shame is about who you are. So I challenge people to find to your core, who are you? Who are you? What defines you? Who accepts you? And it's not going to be another human person. It's going to be a spiritual. I totally believe it's a spiritual experience. You have to get your definition of who you are from somebody who is qualified to determine who you are. And for me, it's God. So, at your core, you really need to know, what are you willing to fight for? What are you willing to battle for? What are your principles, your morals, your standards, your goals, your vision, your values? What are all those things that are your rock solid plumb line? Because I'm sure you've heard, the phrase, if you don't stand for something, you'll fall for anything, including imposter syndrome.
Never more true than in today's world.
Oh
Yeah.
my gosh. Yeah. Yeah.
A whole nother episode.
Yeah.
I actually did that experiment a couple weeks ago with a friend where we took some time and like wrote out, who are you?
Mm-hmm.
Like, right, because I had done my bio, my business bio, and I'm like, well, let me just add my personal. What do I believe? What do I stand for? What's made me who I am.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
it was an interesting experience to go
Mm-hmm.
through that, but makes it a little bit. What it does is it actually gives you more clarity and allows you to make better decisions, because then you're looking at it
Absolutely.
and saying, well, I could do this, but it's really not in line with who I am or who I want to be.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. It's a waymaker for you. When you know where that rudder is pointing, you're right. You know when you're going to go off course. You don't want to go off course. You want to stay straight on the straight and narrow.
Yeah. And when you're suffering from imposter syndrome, it's very easy to get off course when you find a place you feel accepted.
Mm-hmm.
Because you're already questioning, you're already doubting. So if somebody may be accepting you in a certain area, but it's far from where you want to be. And I had a friend a while back. She was delivering her very first speech, and it was extremely powerful. And I remember telling her, I'm like, look, after this is over, you're going to have experiences like you've never had before. And you'll have people come into your life who will somehow try to drag you away from this feeling that you have right now of who you are.
Mm.
And she's like, no, that'll never happen. I'm like, okay. Well, sure enough, a month later, gets a boyfriend who locks herself in, that never like done speaking, done with things for a while, and realized later that that's exactly what happened, where she felt an imposter syndrome presenting her stuff, felt comfort and security from somebody who was taking her very far off course.
Mm.
But there's that emptiness in us when we're not really sure who we are,
Mm-hmm.
that somebody else sees something in us. It's very easy to drag us away from our true self.
Yeah, absolutely. That's why, to make a cheesy little analogy, that's why a Snickers bar tastes so good when you're hungry, and then 30 minutes later when you sit down to a great meal, you have no appetite for it because you're satisfied with the Snickers bar. But then 2 hours later, you're starving again because the Snickers bar didn't last.
Now I just want to run out and get a Snickers bar.
There you go. My work here is done.
Right. So any advice you have for somebody who's in the middle of that right now? How do you get out of imposter syndrome?
Well, I have 5 steps, and I won't give you all 5, but the first step is to realize you're not alone and you're not crazy, that it is a real experience. So cut yourself some slack, give yourself some grace, and realize that there is a way out to make it, to alleviate it. And it does come down to intellectually evaluating the thoughts that keep you stuck, knowing where the emotional root is, embracing the goodness and greatness that you do have to offer people, and getting a spiritual or an internal compass that always is your waymaker, because that is huge.
Something else that I've noticed too is that a lot of people who are highly successful will experience this,
Mm-hmm.
but they will not let go of the success. So they would rather live in this imposter syndrome, live in this moment where they're questioning who they are and what they're worth, because they won't walk away from the money or the recognition.
Well, and that's interesting because you don't have to. I mean, the money and the success came to you because of the skills, abilities, character qualities that you have. Imposter syndrome doesn't negate or replace any of that. And if you get rid of the imposter syndrome, it doesn't mean that you have to walk away from everything that you've accomplished. It does indeed change your next step, where you can now embrace failure. You can take more risks. You can get off that hamster wheel. You can enjoy your success. You can take a day off. You can change careers if you want without wondering, what are people going to say? It completely opens up a whole new set of opportunities and possibilities. Doesn't mean that you have to walk away from a 6-figure income.
And I guess you would be the perfect example of what I'm talking about, being the rocket scientist, and having success there, and yet questioning, is this really who I am? Maybe
Mhm.
should I run and do something else, or, stay in it and own it?
Yeah, I left working at NASA not because I thought I was over imposter syndrome or even because I felt like an imposter, because at that point I didn't even realize that's what I was experiencing. Quite frankly, honestly, I left because the politics started to get to me.
Right.
I was just kind of done with it. Loved the ride that I had there, but it was just time to move on.
Right. So what is, I gonna, first of all, how can we find you? How can we stay in touch with you?
Yeah, my website is maureenzapala.com. It's my first name, last letter, or last initial. Um, you can find my contact information. You could sign up for my newsletter. I've got a cool freebie as an incentive to join the newsletter. I don't sell your email addresses, so don't worry about that. And you can opt out anytime you want. Also on my website are some other resources that you could take advantage of. I have a really cool video program that I just launched actually in the beginning of the shutdown. So it was back in March or beginning of April, called the Fraud Free Framework. It's it's 5 steps, the 5 strategies of the Fraud Free Framework that will help to eliminate or alleviate your imposter syndrome experience, so that you can just unleash your creativity and innovation and excitement and feel great about being great. So all that information is on my website.
Awesome. And one last thing, what would you tell the person feeling stuck today?
Uh, do the next smart thing to begin your journey out of being unstuck. Growth happens in small nudges, not quantum leaps. So whatever that next nudge has to be, do it.
Take that next step. I love it. Thank you very much, Maureen Zappala, and we will catch you guys again next week with another Unstuck and Happy.
Thanks, John.
Coming Unstuck Happiness conferences and moving beyond personal development retreats. Those are amazing. Make sure you join us again next week for another great Unstuck story. And in the meantime, keep living unstuck and happy.